Welcome to another edition of Focus on Alternatives, brought to you by ADISA, the Alternative and Direct Investment Securities Association. For more information like this, please visit adisa.org and check out the resource library. This is a podcast-only edition of Focus on Alts, and I'm your host, Greg Mausz. I'm joined by Rajeev Kotyan, the co-founder of Innovative Advisory Group, and we're going to be talking alternative investments and the application from RIAs. Rajeev, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, Greg. Nice to be here with you today.
So before we get started, how long have you been in the financial advising business? And second question is, how long have you been using alts?
Sure. We started this firm in 2008. We started with the firm focused on not only every other investment aspects on the publicly traded, but also on the alternative side to bring it overall portfolio to the client.
So right from the start, why were you so open to alts right from the start? What was the key driver or interest?
I think the key driver and interest in starting the company was the fact that there were very, very limited advisors who spoke about alternative investments, or even could even have an educated conversation of alternative investments. And so that is a business model to be had. That is a business to be had. So that's one of the reasons we actually started the firm. Our focus was giving a full breadth of investments, publicly traded as well as non-publicly traded. Other firms have chosen piecemeal over these number of years.
And many firms have used alts as a differentiator, and you're obviously part of that trend, but not everybody. So why should RIAs consider introducing alts into their practice if they haven't already?
I think an RIA to be successful overall, or any advisor to be successful overall, should have a way to communicate to their clients about any type of investments, whether they're publicly traded or alternative investments. And if an RIA does not want to introduce it into their practice, that's okay, but you should be educated enough to have a conversation with your client about it and discuss how the capabilities could be there of introducing alts into their portfolios.
Okay. So let's go ahead and expand on that more. What are some of the approaches for an RIA to learn how to incorporate alternative assets?
Sure. Education is obviously the most important aspect of this. You could start with your college education, of course. That's the best place to start. But if you past the college days and you don't want to go back to school, then look at organizations like ADISA or even IPA or CAIA, which are the different education institutions that are around that focus and provide you in a lot of education about alternative investments. But then there's also a pragmatic side of the education. Actually working if you're in the industry, you've got experience in the industry and you want to expand your business, start talking with the broker-dealers and with other RIAs as well as asset sponsors who are in the alternative space. And the majority of them are very happy to have a discussion with you and educate you before even they try to attempt to sell you anything, because they want to make sure that you succeed, because if you succeed, they succeed. And so it's important that you can learn not only what the investments are, but what are the different types of investments, as well as you can learn from the broker-dealers what are the different procedures that they go through in terms of bringing on an alternative investment, learning from the sponsors what they do inside the alternative investment. What do they take the money and do with it? How do they invest? What is the process of investing? If it's a real estate related fund, how do they find the real estate? These are little things of education that you build over time, but these are going to come from a pragmatic aspect, not just from the textbook aspect of working with broker-dealers as well as the asset sponsors and other RIAs.
I really liked how you phrased that, to grow your own education, learn from some of the best practices of broker-dealers, which, this particular conversation is more focused on RIAs, but there's plenty of lessons to be learned and best practices to be gleaned from. But then I love what you said with the asset managers. If they take the time to educate you on the best ways to allocate to alts, it's a win-win. And what's also helpful is that you can learn the things not to do as well, which is every bit as important as what to do.
Absolutely. You better learn both sides, the good, bad, and ugly. Actually, it's all three sides, good, bad, and ugly. From experience, you're going to find a lot of asset sponsors will talk about the ugly that they have faced during the hard times. You can also ask the broker dealers on things that funds that have got defunct over time. So you want the ugly side, but you also want the good side. Trust me, there are more good sides than there are ugly sides. But we hear more about the ugly than we hear about the good. That's just the nature of how news travels.
This is true.
So, but you do want to learn about both sides of the coin.
So, part of analyzing investments, figuring out which ones should be used, and avoiding the bad and the ugly is due diligence. So, how important is due diligence? Who should conduct it? How do you conduct it? Take it away.
So, due diligence comes in various flavors. My background in risk management taught me how to do due diligence. So, yes, as a firm, we could do multi-layers of due diligence. Now, that is a difference between somebody who came with a background of that versus somebody who wants to get into an alternatives and don't have that kind of a background. Due diligence providers exist, and you can work with multiple third-party due diligence providers. Start with that. They are going to focus very much on the asset sponsors. They are going to tell you how good, bad, and ugly that they see that particular asset sponsor is working at or has worked at in the past, whether it's an existing asset sponsor or a new asset sponsor. So you're going to get the asset sponsor level due diligence, not only of the organization and the people who run the asset, but the individual funds that they are creating and fund structures that they're creating. That's one level of due diligence. You want that. Then you move to the next level of due diligence, working with the broker dealers. If you don't have the experience of going directly and working with the asset sponsors, work with the broker dealers. So there's a second level of due diligence which comes from broker dealers. They don't put things on their platforms just because they feel like it, or just because a third-party due diligence provider said it's the best thing since sliced bread. They're going to run their own due diligence and work their process to get the appropriate asset or fund on their platform. Once you've got through that, you still have your fiduciary due diligence that you have to conduct. Now, that could be not only finding the key questions that you want to ask the asset sponsor and the broker dealer, but then you want to make sure it is the appropriate fit into your client portfolio. There's an aspect of that on the due diligence that is important, that you make sure that it is an appropriate fit. That's your fiduciary obligation as an RIA, and you don't violate that just because somebody told you this is the best thing since sliced bread. So when you go out and look at due diligence, or when I go out, I look at all the three layers before we decide that this is something that we want to introduce to a particular client.
All of that makes sense. There's a lot of steps, but I think all of them are needed. So what about an RIA maybe newer to the space, or maybe they have their way of doing business and they want their clients to have the benefit of alts, but they don't want to have to become an alt expert? Are there any solutions for those types of RIAs?
Absolutely. Work with other RIAs is one way to do it. Talk to your peers. I mean, we're all in this market not only to compete against each other, which I rarely see that, but we are here more to collaborate with each other in a way that makes sense to everyone. So that's one approach, and I'll expand a little bit more on that.
Please do, because what does that look like, an RIA working with another RIA?
That is a great question on how do you work in a situation where you want to provide the best service to your client and provide them options and alternatives, but you don't necessarily want to build your practice completely going in that direction, because that's an investment that somebody has to do. And as an RIA, the investment in that is it could be expensive. If you, just educating yourself is expensive enough, but building the operational side and every aspect it could be expensive. So one approach to working with and building out your practice is working with other RIAs who have built out their practice in the alternative space. And that collaborative effort of working with other RIAs to provide the solutions for your client will not only benefit your client, but you could also come up with agreements with the other RIAs where you could still get paid, and the other RIAs is providing the level of the due diligence and the fiduciary that is required for any particular RIA. So that's a very critical and important aspect of getting your feet wet and moving for the best of your client. On the other hand, if you're an experienced RIA and you want to expand the scope of what you want to provide your clients, then you don't have to be the master of every sector that exists on the planet. Just take the different scenarios at ADISA. Not only do you hear about the primary bread and butter at ADISA, which is real estate, but you hear oil and gas. We've heard about digital currencies. We've heard about wine. We've heard about all sorts of different funds that come across the board out here. There are specialists in RIAs who spend a lot of time researching and building up knowledge in that particular sector. And instead of them trying to go out and work and re-educate themselves, I'm not saying that is bad. As I've said before, keep educating yourself on a consistent basis. You can collaborate with other RIAs at the same time and still provide oil and gas. Or if you're focused on real estate, then you could provide oil and gas through another RIA and work in collaboration to provide the best for your client in a portfolio allocation.
That's brilliant. Collaboration is great. It's tough to be an expert in everything.
Absolutely.
So we've on a path here. You've talked about why we need to implement alts. We've talked about how to learn, how to conduct due diligence. I think the last leg here is operational related things. So you've made the decision to go down this road, but how do you handle some of the fee? Performance reporting and consolidated statement. Actually, let's go there first. How do you integrate that into the practice?
So there are tools. You asked me the same question when we started a firm. There was hardly any tools which handle the alternatives. Right now, thanks to a lot of effort by a lot of technology companies as well as broker-dealers and sponsors really pushing the technology companies to support this space, there's technology now available to provide the appropriate performance reporting and consolidated statements that are required. Now, typically, RIAs depend on custodians to provide the actual statements, but the consolidated statements are great when you're having a discussion with clients. We as a firm, at this particular point in time, we built our own because nothing existed, but we are in search for the appropriate technology for our firm. So there's no good time to jump and change and tweak your technology for the future.
So as you've been researching, have you come across any high potential solutions here or favorite technologies?
The things that are going to do the right things for the client.
Fair enough. Okay, the next part is fee billing. How do you handle fee billing on these alternative assets? Maybe they're illiquid, non-traded assets. How does that work?
First, let's make a little bit of a correction on the wordings that you used over here. Any asset could be deemed as illiquid. If there's no buyer and there's no seller, that asset is illiquid, whether it is publicly traded or it is not publicly traded, period.
Sure.
So once you have changed that part of the mindset, then you have to look at then you can start discussing anything associated with alternatives on non-publicly traded. Prime example, 2008, Lehman Brothers. I'm still holding that.
Oh, really?
Can somebody buy it from me? No, there's no buyer.
Right.
So So take your pick. Illiquid asset is an illiquid asset, period. Doesn't matter whether there's an exchange or no exchange, or a network or no network. On the other hand, your question was associated with the billing. Our philosophy as a firm, and I believe that should be a kind of how the industry should look at it from an RIA segment of the industry. And I will not speak about the broker-dealers and the asset sponsors, but from the RIAs segment of the industry, you should not discriminate your fees towards an asset class. Your fiduciary is to the client. So because you're managing a client's portfolio, regardless of whether they're in publicly traded or non-publicly traded, that is alternative assets, then it doesn't matter. It should be based on the assets under management, overall assets under management. And so if you create a fee structure which says XYZ style of assets are going to be this charge A, and ABC style of assets are going to be charge B, that basically creates an incentive to put clients into one charge or the other, which is going to be beneficial to you, which is a violation of your fiduciary obligation. Mm-hmm. And so that's the example of you should have an even keel fee basis. The second side of it, and I think that's where you may be headed with a particular question, is how do you collect on the fees from a particular client if they're allocated in non-publicly traded assets?
Of course.
That's a collection issue. That's not a billing issue.
Okay.
You could either consider working with a client, or you should consider working with a client where you have not only the obligation where you could take it out of fees from the portfolio, or invoice the client directly and collect it on a credit card, mm-hmm. or a check. But that discussion does not happen after the fact. It happens when you're signing the agreement with the client, and when you're long before even you're having a discussion of alternative investments.
Got it. Well, thank you for walking us through those little nuances and for breaking down all of those words. And, I know that it's not an easy solution, and people have to wrap their heads around these details. So, Rajeev, thank you for your time today. I appreciate you joining us here in the studio.
Sure thing, Greg. This was an amazing conversation. And as you're well aware, I like breaking down the small little nuances.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for listening to another episode of Focus on Alternatives. Again, for more information like this, please visit ADISA.org. Thank you.